If you can't manage your own life, you can't help this company. The words landed harder than the silence that followed. 300 employees sat frozen in the glass-walled auditorium of Hayes Logistics headquarters, their eyes shifting from the stage to the man standing near the back row. No one spoke. No one moved. And yet before the night was over, the woman who said those words would find herself alone on a dark highway praying that someone, anyone, would stop. The quarterly operations meeting had already been running 20 minutes behind schedule when Ethan Brooks quietly stepped through the rear doors. Rainwater still clung to the shoulders of his worn navy jacket. His hair was damp. His breathing was steady but slightly rushed. He hated being late. In 12 years at Hayes Logistics, he almost never was. Ethan moved toward an empty seat, hoping not to draw attention. He should have known better. Victoria Hayes noticed everything. Standing beneath the bright presentation screens, the 36-year-old CEO paused mid-sentence. Her sharp blue eyes locked onto Ethan immediately. The room followed her gaze. "Mr. Brooks," she said. The microphone carried her voice through every corner of the auditorium. Ethan stopped walking. "Yes, ma'am. What time does this meeting begin?" A few uncomfortable glances passed between coworkers. Ethan remained calm. 8 o'clock. Victoria folded her arms. "And what time is it now?" Ethan glanced toward the wall clock. 8:12. Exactly. Her heels clicked softly against the stage floor as she stepped forward. 12 minutes late. Nobody spoke. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder than before. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. "I understand." Victoria nodded once. "Do you?" Her voice remained professional, but cold. "Because this company survives on accountability. Every employee here is expected to respect schedules, commitments, and standards." Ethan didn't argue. He didn't explain. He didn't mention the hospital parking garage. He didn't mention the breathing treatment. He didn't mention the frightened little girl clutching his hand before sunrise. Instead, he simply stood there, quiet, steady. Victoria opened a folder resting on the podium. "Mr. Brooks, your attendance record has shown multiple late arrivals over the last 6 months." Ethan knew exactly why. Doctor appointments, school emergencies, unexpected calls from nurses. Life as a single father rarely followed a schedule. But again, he said nothing. Victoria's expression hardened. "Effective immediately, your employment with Hayes Logistics is terminated." The words echoed through the room. A few employees looked down at their desks. Others stared in disbelief. Ethan remained motionless for a moment. Then he nodded once. "Understood." Victoria seemed almost surprised by the lack of resistance. "You have nothing to say?" Ethan looked at her calmly. "No, ma'am." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. Only for a second. Then it disappeared. Ethan gathered the notebook he had carried for years and walked toward the exit. No anger. No argument. No bitterness. Just quiet dignity. As the doors closed behind him, the meeting continued. Numbers filled the screens. Reports resumed. Yet something had changed. Outside, gray clouds rolled across the Chicago skyline. Ethan climbed into his aging Ford pickup and stared at the photo taped beside the dashboard. 8-year-old Lily smiled back at him, missing one front tooth. He smiled faintly. Then he started the engine and drove away, unaware that before midnight, fate would place him and Victoria Hayes on the same road once again. Ethan drove north through the steady drizzle, the windshield wipers moving back and forth with a rhythm that felt strangely comforting. Chicago traffic crawled beneath a sky the color of old steel. The city lights reflected across wet pavement, turning every street into a river of gold and gray. Most people would have been thinking about the job they had just lost. Most people would have been replaying every word, every insult, every unfair moment. Ethan Brooks was thinking about dinner. More specifically, he was thinking about whether Lily would be hungry after her treatment. The small pharmacy bag rested on the passenger seat beside him. He glanced toward it every few minutes, as if reassuring himself it was still there. Some things mattered. Some things did not. The truck eventually rolled into a quiet neighborhood on the western edge of the city. Small houses lined the street. Porch lights glowed warmly through the rain. Ethan parked beside a modest white bungalow that had seen better years. The paint was fading. The gutters needed work. The front steps creaked whenever someone climbed them. But it was home. The moment he opened the front door, a familiar voice called out, "Daddy." A smile immediately softened his tired face. "In here, kiddo." Lily appeared from the living room wrapped in an oversized blanket decorated with cartoon stars. Her blonde hair was slightly messy, and her cheeks still carried traces of exhaustion from the long morning. "Did you get my medicine?" Ethan lifted the pharmacy bag. "First thing." She grinned. "You are the best." "I know," Ethan replied with mock seriousness. Lily laughed. The sound filled the house like sunlight breaking through clouds. For a few precious seconds, nothing else existed. Not the company, not the meeting, not the uncertainty waiting around the corner. Just a father and his daughter. Later that evening, rain tapped softly against the windows while a pot of chicken soup simmered on the stove. Lily sat at the kitchen table coloring pictures while Ethan sorted through a stack of bills. Electric, water, insurance, medical expenses. His expression remained calm, but the numbers told a difficult story. Without a steady paycheck, things would become complicated very quickly. Still, he folded each statement carefully and placed them into neat piles. Panic had never solved a problem. Across town, Victoria Hayes stood alone inside the 43rd floor executive office that overlooked the Chicago skyline. The building had mostly emptied hours ago, but she remained behind. A massive presentation glowed across the conference screen. Quarterly projections, investor concerns, operational restructuring. Every chart seemed to demand something from her. More efficiency, more discipline, more results. She rubbed her temples and stared out at the rain. Success looked impressive from the outside. Few people saw the pressure hidden. Underneath it, her phone buzzed. A text message from a board member appeared on the screen. The message was brief. "We need to discuss tomorrow's numbers. Investors are nervous." Victoria exhaled slowly. The pressure never stopped. Not even for a moment. Meanwhile, Ethan tucked Lily into bed just after 9 o'clock. She hugged her stuffed rabbit tightly. "Daddy, yeah. Are we okay?" The question lingered in the darkness. Ethan sat beside her and gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "We are going to be just fine." Lily studied his face for a moment before nodding. Somehow she believed him completely. Within minutes, she drifted to sleep. Ethan remained there a little longer, listening to her steady breathing. Then he quietly stood and looked out the bedroom window. Beyond the glass, storm clouds gathered across the horizon. The rain was getting heavier. Somewhere in the city, another long night was just beginning. By 10:30 that night, the storm had fully settled over northern Illinois. Rain hammered rooftops, overflowed gutters, and painted long silver streaks across every highway leading out of Chicago. Inside her office, Victoria Hayes finally closed the last presentation on her computer. The digital clock in the corner of her screen glowed brightly. 10:32. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the city lights beyond the glass walls. Thousands of windows shined across the skyline, each hiding its own worries, its own struggles, its own stories. Most people probably assumed that being a chief executive officer meant freedom. Victoria knew better. Success came with expectations. Expectations came with pressure, and pressure never slept. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from another board member. Another request for numbers, forecasts, explanations, and assurances. Victoria silenced the device and slipped it into her purse. For once, she wanted a few hours without demands. The underground parking garage was nearly empty when she reached her black luxury sedan. The building security guard offered a polite wave. Victoria returned it with a tired smile. Within minutes, she was heading west through the storm. Rain pounded against the windshield so heavily that even the fastest setting on the wipers struggled to keep pace. Traffic was thin. Most sensible people were already home. 30 miles outside the city, the urban skyline gave way to rolling highways bordered by dark fields and patches of woodland. The storm seemed stronger out there. Wind pushed against the vehicle. Water pooled across sections of road. Victoria tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Then something unexpected happened. A warning light flashed on the dashboard. She frowned. A second warning appeared. Then a third. "Come on," she muttered. The engine suddenly hesitated. The smooth hum disappeared. The car lurched slightly before losing power. Victoria immediately guided it toward the shoulder. Rain battered the roof as the vehicle rolled to a stop beside a lonely stretch of highway. For a moment, she simply sat there staring at the dashboard. No, she pressed the ignition button. Nothing. She tried again. Silence. The storm answered with another powerful burst of rain. Victoria grabbed her phone. One bar of signal appeared, then disappeared. She moved it toward the windshield. Nothing. She tried again. Still nothing. Outside, darkness stretched in every direction. No gas stations. No businesses. No nearby houses. Just miles of wet pavement and open land. For the first time all day, uncertainty crept into her chest. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Cars occasionally rushed by, headlights cutting briefly through the rain before vanishing into the darkness. Not one stopped. Victoria stepped outside beneath a small umbrella and waved at several passing vehicles. Nobody slowed down. The cold rain soaked the edge of her coat. Wind tugged at her hair. Eventually, she climbed back inside the car and locked the doors. The cabin suddenly felt much smaller than before. Much quieter. Much lonelier. She glanced at the clock. 11:14. Somewhere across the city, meetings and presentations no longer mattered. Quarterly reports no longer mattered. Investor pressure no longer mattered. All that mattered was getting home safely. Another vehicle appeared in the distance. Old headlights. Not bright. Not expensive. Just steady. Victoria watched as the truck approached through sheets of rain. Like every other vehicle that night, she expected it to continue past her without hesitation. Instead, the brake lights glowed red. The truck slowed, then pulled onto the shoulders several yards ahead. Victoria stared through the windshield. The driver's door opened. A familiar figure stepped into the storm. And for the first time that night, her breath caught in her throat. For a second, neither of them moved. Rain drummed against metal and glass while the wind swept across the empty highway. Ethan pulled the collar of his jacket higher and walked toward her stranded sedan. Victoria opened the door and stepped out carefully beneath her umbrella. Water splashed around her shoes. The sight felt almost unreal. 12 hours earlier, she had been standing on a stage looking down at him. Now she stood on the side of a deserted road looking up at the only person who had stopped. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly. Ethan glanced at the disabled car and then back at her. "Are you okay?" The question caught her off guard. No bitterness. No accusation. No mention of the morning. Just concern. "I think so," she replied. The car suddenly lost power. Ethan nodded. "Let me take a look." He set down his flashlight and walked toward the front of the vehicle. Victoria watched silently as he examined the engine compartment. Rain soaked his sleeves almost immediately, but he did not seem to notice. Several minutes passed. Finally, he closed the hood gently. "It is not good." Victoria folded her arms against the cold. "Can it be fixed?" Ethan shook his head. "Not tonight." The answer settled heavily between them. Another gust of wind rattled the nearby guardrail. Victoria looked down the empty highway. "I tried calling for help. No signal. Nothing." Ethan checked his own phone. The screen showed the same result. "Same here." Silence followed. The storm seemed louder now. Far away, thunder rolled across the dark sky. Victoria glanced toward the clock on her dashboard. Nearly midnight. "I suppose I can wait until morning." Ethan looked around at the isolated stretch of road. Miles of farmland. Few passing vehicles. Temperatures dropping steadily. He already knew that was not a good plan. There is a problem with that. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "What problem?" Ethan pointed toward the horizon. The county weather service predicted flash flooding overnight. They already closed one bridge south of here. Victoria followed his gaze. Rain continued to fall relentlessly. "Wonderful." Ethan almost smiled. "Almost. My house is about 15 minutes away." Victoria looked at him. "You are offering to help me? You need somewhere warm." The simplicity of the statement somehow made it more powerful. Victoria found herself studying him differently. Most people would have enjoyed watching her struggle after what happened earlier. Some might have reminded her of every harsh word. Ethan didn't either. He simply saw someone who needed help. Nothing more. Nothing less. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. Ethan picked up his flashlight. "You do not have to say anything." Another brief silence followed. Then Victoria nodded slowly. For the first time that day, she felt something unfamiliar. Not control. Not confidence. Gratitude. They gathered a few belongings from the car before locking it for the night. As Victoria climbed into the passenger seat of Ethan's aging pickup truck, she noticed a pink backpack resting behind the front seat. Beside it sat a stuffed rabbit with one floppy ear. A small reminder that another life depended on the man beside her. Ethan started the engine. Warm air slowly filled the cabin. Outside, the storm continued to rage across the darkness. Ahead of them, a narrow country road disappeared into the rain. Neither of them realized that before sunrise, everything they believed about each other would begin to change. The drive took less than 20 minutes, but neither of them spoke very much. The heater hummed softly while rain streaked across the windshield. Occasionally, the headlights revealed empty farm fields stretching into darkness. Victoria sat quietly, watching the road and stealing brief glances at the man beside her. Earlier that morning, she had believed she understood Ethan Brooks completely. Now she was no longer certain. When the truck finally turned onto a narrow residential street, she noticed how modest everything looked. Small houses, old trees, porch lights glowing through the storm. Nothing flashy, nothing impressive by corporate standards. Yet something about the neighborhood felt peaceful, safe. Ethan pulled into a short driveway and parked beside the white bungalow. Warm yellow light glowed from one window. "We are here," he said. Victoria followed him through the rain toward the front door. The moment they stepped inside, she was greeted by the scent of chicken soup and cinnamon. The house was simple: worn hardwood floors, family photographs on the walls, a bookshelf crowded with novels and school projects. Everything showed signs of use. Everything showed signs of care. "Daddy," a sleepy voice called from the hallway. Ethan immediately softened. "You should be asleep, kiddo." Lily appeared wearing star-patterned pajamas and clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes widened when she noticed the visitor standing beside him. Oh, Victoria suddenly felt awkward. Boardrooms had never intimidated her. Meeting an 8-year-old child somehow did. Lily looked from Ethan to Victoria. "Who is she?" Ethan smiled faintly. "A friend who got stuck in the storm." Lily nodded seriously as if this explanation made perfect sense. "Storms are mean." Victoria could not help smiling. "Sometimes they are." Lily stepped closer. "Do you need hot chocolate?" Ethan laughed quietly. "That is apparently how we solve emergencies around here." "It works," Lily replied. Within minutes, they were sitting around the kitchen table. Rain tapped gently against the windows while steam rose from 3 mugs. Victoria wrapped her hands around the warm cup. The kitchen felt different from any place she had been in years. No presentations. No negotiations. No people competing for influence. Just warmth. Just conversation. Just life. Her eyes drifted toward a stack of papers resting near the refrigerator. Medical forms. Prescription receipts. Appointment schedules. She quickly looked away, feeling as though she had seen something private. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. He rarely explained himself. Lily happily filled the silence. Instead, she talked about school, about her favorite teacher, about a science project involving butterflies. Ethan listened carefully to every word. Not distracted, not checking a phone, not multitasking, simply listening. Victoria found herself watching him more than the child. The patience, the kindness, the quiet attention. These were qualities she rarely encountered among executives worth millions of dollars. Later, as midnight approached, another alert appeared on Ethan's phone. He read it and frowned slightly. "The bridge is closed now." Victoria looked up. Meaning nobody is getting across the river until morning. The reality settled over the room. She would not be leaving tonight. Ethan stood and retrieved extra blankets from a nearby closet. "You can take Lily's room. She loves sleepovers." "I do," Lily confirmed enthusiastically. Victoria laughed for the first time all day. A genuine laugh. The kind that surprised even her. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, surrounded by a father and daughter who had every reason to resent her, yet showed only grace, Victoria Hayes began to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Humble. The house grew quiet after 1 o'clock. The storm still rattled the windows, but inside everything felt calm. Victoria lay awake in the small guest room, staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. Too many thoughts crowded her mind. Too many images from the day replayed themselves over and over. The meeting, the termination, the highway, the warm kitchen, Ethan's kindness. None of it fit together the way she expected. Eventually, she slipped from the bed and walked quietly toward the kitchen for a glass of water. A faint light glowed beneath a partially open door near the end of the hallway. Curious, she slowed her steps. Inside, Ethan sat alone at a small desk. Papers covered the surface. Medical invoices, insurance forms, prescription statements. Victoria immediately recognized the stack she had noticed earlier. Ethan rubbed his eyes and picked up a calculator. The silence in the room felt heavy. Not dramatic, not desperate, just the weight of responsibility carried by someone who had been carrying it alone for a very long time. Victoria stepped back before he noticed her. She felt as though she had accidentally witnessed something sacred. The next morning arrived beneath gray skies and lingering rain. The storm had weakened but not disappeared. The smell of coffee drifted through the house. Victoria entered the kitchen to find Lily already sitting at the table eating pancakes. "Good morning," Lily said cheerfully. "Good morning." Ethan stood at the stove preparing another batch. "Coffee?" he asked. "Please." For a while they talked about simple things. School, weather, movies, ordinary conversation. Then Lily looked up unexpectedly. "Daddy, did you lose your job?" The room fell silent. Victoria froze. Ethan remained calm. "Where did that come from?" Lily shrugged. "I heard you talking on the phone last night." Ethan set down the spatula and pulled out a chair beside her. "Yes, I lost my job." Lily lowered her eyes. "Was it because of me?" Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. Ethan immediately shook his head. "Absolutely not. But you were late because of my appointment." Ethan smiled gently. "Lily, look at me." She did. "Taking care of you will never be a mistake." The little girl nodded slowly, though uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. Then she turned toward Victoria. "Did Daddy do something bad?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came. She had faced investors worth billions of dollars without hesitation. She had negotiated mergers and survived boardroom battles. Yet one honest question from an 8-year-old child left her speechless. Lily continued, "Daddy always tries really hard." Ethan looked uncomfortable. "Kiddo," but Lily was not finished. "He took me to the hospital before work because I could not breathe very well. Then he still tried to get there." The room became completely still. Victoria slowly looked at Ethan. He focused on the pancakes, not on her, not on the conversation, as though none of this mattered, as though he did not need anyone's sympathy. In that moment, the entire story finally became clear. The late arrival, the exhaustion, the silence. He had never offered an excuse because he was not interested in defending himself. He had simply accepted the consequence and moved forward. Victoria stared at the coffee in front of her. The warmth suddenly felt uncomfortable in her hands. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she realized she might have made a terrible mistake. And the person paying the price for it had spent the entire night showing her nothing but grace. After breakfast, the rain eased into a gentle mist. The roads remained wet, but the storm had finally exhausted itself. Ethan stepped outside to inspect a loose section of gutter that had been rattling all night. Victoria watched from the kitchen window as he climbed a short ladder and quietly went about the repair. No complaints, no frustration, no sign that his entire future had been thrown into uncertainty less than 24 hours earlier. Lily sat at the table drawing pictures with colored pencils. "Daddy fixes everything," she said proudly. Victoria looked down at the drawing. It showed a small house, a bright yellow sun, and two smiling figures holding hands. "Everything?" Victoria asked softly. Lily nodded. "Well, not everything. But he tries." Those words stayed with Victoria long after the conversation ended. Around mid-morning, Ethan drove her back toward the stranded vehicle. The clouds had begun to break apart, revealing patches of pale blue sky. Along the way, they passed small farms, local diners, and quiet neighborhoods. Places most executives never noticed while flying between meetings and airports. Ethan seemed to know every road, every shortcut, every family-owned business. Several people waved when they recognized his truck. He waved back every time. At a small intersection, an elderly woman standing beside a disabled minivan caught his attention. Ethan immediately slowed. "What are you doing?" Victoria asked. "Helping Mrs. Reynolds." As though that explained everything. He pulled over and spent 15 minutes checking the battery connection. The woman thanked him repeatedly. Ethan refused the money she offered. "Just get home safely," he said. Back on the road, Victoria stared at him. "Do you always do that?" Ethan shrugged. "She is 82. That was not my question." Ethan smiled faintly, but did not answer. 20 minutes later, they reached the stranded sedan. A tow truck was already waiting. The driver greeted Ethan by name. Another surprise. While paperwork was completed, Victoria found herself speaking with the driver. "You know him?" she asked. The man laughed. "Everybody around here knows Ethan." "Really? Last winter my son got stuck during a snowstorm. Ethan spent 3 hours helping people get home." Victoria blinked. "He never mentioned that." Sounds like him. Later, as they followed the tow truck toward town, another piece of the puzzle appeared unexpectedly. The driver casually mentioned that Ethan had once been offered a management position with a major transportation company in St. Louis. A job with nearly triple the salary. Victoria looked toward Ethan. You never told me that. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. It was years ago. Why did you turn it down? A brief silence filled the truck. Lily was 6. Victoria waited. Ethan finally continued. Her treatments were becoming more frequent. Moving would have meant changing doctors. New schools. New routines. So you stayed. She needed stability more than I needed a promotion. The answer was simple. Honest. Final. Victoria turned toward the window and watched the passing landscape blur by. For years, she had measured people by performance reviews, attendance records, and productivity reports. Yet sitting beside her was a man who had quietly sacrificed opportunities, income, and personal ambitions without ever asking for recognition. The realization settled deeply within her. She had not fired an unreliable employee. She had fired one of the strongest people she had ever met. And somehow, despite everything, he still treated her with respect. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and sharp autumn sunlight reflecting off the glass exterior of Hayes Logistics headquarters. Employees filled the lobby carrying coffee cups and laptops, exchanging the usual conversations about deadlines and meetings. Yet an unusual tension seemed to hang in the air. Rumors had spread throughout the weekend. Nobody knew exactly what had happened, but everyone knew something had changed. Victoria Hayes stepped out of the executive elevator shortly before 9 o'clock. Her expression was calm, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that many employees had never seen before. Within minutes, a company-wide message appeared on every computer screen requesting all department heads and staff members to gather in the main auditorium. Confused conversations immediately followed. Quarterly announcements were not scheduled. Neither were emergency meetings. By 9:30, the room was full. Hundreds of employees sat waiting beneath the bright stage lights. The same room, the same seats, the same stage where Ethan Brooks had quietly walked away only days earlier. Victoria stood alone at the podium. She looked across the crowd and allowed the silence to settle. Thank you for coming, she began. Her voice was steady, professional, different somehow. I called this meeting because I need to address a decision that I made. Curious glances spread through the audience. Victoria took a slow breath. Last Friday, I terminated an employee in this room. A ripple moved through the crowd. Everyone knew exactly who she meant. At the time, I believed I was enforcing accountability. She paused. I was wrong. The auditorium became completely silent. No whispers. No movement. Victoria continued. Leadership requires standards, but it also requires understanding. It requires character. And most importantly, it requires seeing people clearly. Several executives exchanged surprised looks. Victoria had never spoken this way before. Over the weekend, I learned facts that I should have known before making my decision. More importantly, I learned something about the man I dismissed. Her eyes moved across the audience. I learned that integrity does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it sacrifices opportunities. Sometimes it chooses responsibility over recognition. The silence deepened. I fired one of the finest people in this company. No one looked away. No one checked a phone. The room seemed frozen in place. Victoria stepped away from the podium. Ethan, if you are willing, would you please join me? Heads immediately turned toward the rear entrance. The doors slowly opened. Ethan Brooks walked inside wearing a simple blue button-down shirt. Nothing about him appeared different. No dramatic entrance. No anger. No triumph. Just the same quiet dignity he had carried all along. Employees began to rise from their seats. One by one. Then dozens more followed. Soon the entire auditorium was standing. The applause started softly before growing louder. Not because Ethan demanded attention, but because respect had finally caught up with him. Ethan looked genuinely uncomfortable as he approached the stage. Victoria met him halfway. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she extended her hand. I owe you an apology. Ethan accepted the handshake. Thank you. Victoria shook her head gently. No, thank you. The room watched in silence as she continued. Effective immediately, your position is fully restored. But that is not all. Ethan looked surprised. Victoria smiled faintly. Some people make companies successful. Other people make them better. We need more of the second kind. The applause lasted far longer than Ethan wanted. By the time the auditorium finally settled, he looked as though he wished he could disappear back into the crowd. That alone told everyone something important about him. Recognition had never been the goal. Responsibility had been. After the meeting, Victoria introduced a new position created specifically around flexibility and employee support initiatives. Ethan would help develop programs for working parents, caregivers, and employees facing family challenges. It was not a promotion built around status. It was built around purpose. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring. Then spring slowly unfolded into summer. Changes spread through Hayes logistics in ways that quarterly reports could never fully measure. Employee turnover dropped. Morale improved. Productivity quietly increased. But the most noticeable difference was cultural. People listened more carefully. Managers asked more questions before making decisions. Policies became more human. The company still valued excellence, but now it also valued understanding. And at the center of much of that change stood a man who never asked to lead it. Ethan continued to arrive each morning with the same quiet humility. He still drove the old pickup truck. He still stopped to help stranded neighbors. He still spent every evening focused on the person who mattered most. Lily's health gradually improved. Her treatments became less frequent. Her laughter became more common. And for Ethan, that was worth more than any title he could have received. Victoria found herself visiting their neighborhood more often than she ever expected. Sometimes she would stop by after work with takeout from Lily's favorite restaurant. Sometimes she would attend school events when Ethan was delayed by meetings. Sometimes she would simply sit on the porch with a cup of coffee while the three of them watched the sunset paint the sky above the quiet street. Nothing happened quickly. Nothing felt forced. Trust grew the same way strong things often do. Slowly, patiently, honestly. One warm afternoon, nearly a year after the storm, Victoria walked through company headquarters carrying a stack of reports. Employees greeted her as she passed. She returned each greeting with a smile. As she approached her office, a familiar voice echoed down the hallway. "Miss Victoria." Victoria turned. Lily came running toward her, carrying a school project covered in colorful drawings and photographs. Ethan followed behind at a much slower pace, shaking his head with amusement. "Easy there, kiddo." Lily ignored the advice entirely. She reached Victoria and immediately held up the project. "I got an A." Victoria examined it with exaggerated seriousness. "An A?" Lily nodded proudly. "My best grade all year." "That is very impressive." Lily grinned. "Can I show it in your office?" Victoria smiled. "Of course, sweetheart." The little girl slipped her hand into Victoria's without hesitation. Together they walked toward the office while Ethan followed a few steps behind. For a moment he stopped and watched them. The sight brought something peaceful to his eyes. Not surprise. Not disbelief. Gratitude. Because life had not magically become perfect. Challenges still existed. Responsibilities still remained. Yet somewhere along the way, what began with misunderstanding had become respect. What began with judgment had become grace. And what began on a lonely highway during a storm had quietly become something neither of them expected. The strongest people are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the ones who keep showing kindness when they have every reason not to. Sometimes they are the ones who choose dignity over bitterness, character over pride, and second chances over resentment. And sometimes, when the noise finally fades away, those are the people who leave the deepest mark on every life they touch.